everyone. This is Kylene with Parents for Public Schools of Pitt County, and I am here with a really unique question and answer session this week. I'm joined by two wonderful ladies who work for our school system, and I'd love to have you two introduce yourselves.
All right. Patricia, I'll let you go first.
Okay, thanks. My name is Patricia Cannon. I am lead school psychologist for the district.
And I'm Terry Avin, and I'm one of the school psychologists in the district.
All right, so folks who are watching, you may have noticed that both of the ladies are school psychologists. And this is School Psychology Week. It's a week to really appreciate our school psychologists and all of the important work that they do in our schools to really keep our schools running. They have some very important behind the scenes jobs. So we've collected some questions from some parents out there and are just going to hear from these ladies to better understand what they do and how we as parents might interact with them. So ladies, we're going to start off just real basic. If you all could help us understand what exactly is the role of a school psychologist, and tell us how that's a little different from, say, a school social worker or a school guidance counselor.
Okay, all right, I'll start. First of all, I'd like to thank Ms. Dibble and Ms. Johnson for pulling this together. It is a great opportunity for all of us as school psychologists to kind of have a conversation about the role of school psychologists in the schools. In talking about what that role is, school psychologists in schools are members of school teams that we support students' ability to learn and we support the teacher's ability to teach. That's kind of the two main things that school psychologists are trying to do out in our schools. This particular week is National School Psychology Week, and that happens every year about the same week in November. So that's what we're celebrating this week. And this year's theme is the power of possibilities. And it kind of centers around what our role is. And it highlights that school psychologists can play roles in nurturing students' potentials. We help children grow in skills such as social skills, empathy, compassion for others, individual interpersonal skills. Oftentimes, some of the times when we're out in schools, one of the things that we hear teachers and administrators and people say, we have this kid or this group of kids or these students, they cannot get along. Y'all know, as parents and as teachers, we hear that all the time. They can't get along with each other, or they're arguing about something, and it's kind of long standing. So we hear that a lot. So we help teams with those sort of things. We collaborate with problem solving teams, with IEP teams, with PBIS teams, and you all know that these are all different groups of teams, and the school psychologists are simply a part of those teams. And of course, we have expertise and specialized knowledge in things like special education and ethics. We assist schools with interventions and crisis support, data collection, collaboration. We're helpers. We're the help teams. One of the major differences in between school psychologists and school counselors is just simply that counselors are more focused on day-to-day academic supports and personal and social supports. And in the high school setting, they are focusing on probably career goals and those types of things. So that's one of the major differences.
Right. Thank you so much. That was such a thorough explanation.
I was going to say, she covered it.
Yeah. Ms. Avin, did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think she covered it in the sense that we are definitely involved in that intervention piece. You know, I think that's one of the things that we can really offer to teachers. And as we kind of go through the conversation and talking about how we support schools, certainly that's one of the things that is really, you know, that we're really involved in supporting academics and behavior and emotional issues that children bring to the table when they're in the school setting.
Sure. I hear a lot, a theme that I hear a lot in Pitt County Schools is teamwork. And
Mhm.
it really sounds like you all focus on being part of a team. So it doesn't sound like there's often times when a child would only work with you, but you would really be part of a team of making a child the healthiest that they can be and a family the healthiest that they can be. That lots of people come to that table and you all get to be a strong voice at that table. So during COVID, it feels like a question I frequently ask is what's different during COVID? What's changed during COVID? So how has your role changed during COVID? Are there specific things that you're really focusing on more during COVID than maybe you would during other times?
I think this has given us the unique opportunity to focus more on that SEL, the social emotional learning, because it is very vital. Right now, we know children are going to react differently to things that are going on in the situation with COVID and whether they're virtual or in person. So this has, again, through a team approach, has allowed us the opportunity to focus on that. Our district does have a district SEL team. Each of our schools have SEL teams that are comprised of psychologists and counselors and the healthcare provider in that school and administration. And it's really given us the opportunity now to start really collecting information and data through questionnaires of our students of how they are doing. And then not only looking at how they're doing, and I'll correct myself there, not only the students, but staff, because right, teachers, administrators, everybody is being impacted. Not only looking at how they're impacted, but what can we do to support them? Where are the areas of need? And starting to put into place things for students and staff and everything to help them feel better during this time. Because certainly in all of this, I think sometimes um, everybody, certainly we're focused on the academics. There's concerns about what this is doing to students academically, but needing that certainly the importance of what is it doing to them from a mental health perspective as well. So yes, from my perspective, I think it has been a really nice opportunity to get a little bit more involved in that part of my job.
Thank you. Yeah, again, it's been such a wonderful opportunity during COVID for us to realize that while academics are so important, academics actually excel when the social emotional piece is excelling.
Right.
So we really
Mhm.
have to have all of that together. And we're so thankful for a team of folks who are really focusing on that aspect of our children. Ms. Cannon, did you have anything to add to that question?
Just a little bit. And as we all know, and we as educators, we say this, but there's actually data to support that social emotional functioning is key in academic functioning. We say, well, they can't learn if they're not okay. Well, that is really a true fact. And we mean everybody. We mean the student, the parents, the teachers. If people aren't okay, there's not going to be a whole lot of learning going on. And you see learning happening better and you see improvement in grades when students do feel confident about their environment, confident about their support system. So we do believe that, and there's actually data to support that. So
to shift focus just a little bit, we have a parent engagement program that we run at Parents for Public Schools. And one of our modules is all about special needs students and there's the rights of the parents and responsibilities of the school system. So tell us a little bit about your role as a school psychologist in assisting with things like evaluations and testing, whether it be for a behavioral issue or ADHD or learning disabilities or any of the gamut of needs that our students might have. How are you all involved in that process of evaluating and testing a student?
Okay. And I'll start with that, and then Patricia can jump in.
okay.
We are involved from the beginning, from the problem solving stage on a student. We know that there are some needs of students that may not need to go to the degree where that student may need specially designed instruction. It may be that working collaboratively with the teacher, some interventions could be put into place to address if it's an academic or behavioral need, for example. In terms of where we are, again, we're involved throughout, and it is, a process, an evaluation process, rather than like a testing event, like I kind of like to look at it. If formal assessment is done, that's one piece. There's all this other data that we're looking at and collecting. If we're looking at a child, eligibility for special education. And I think, is that what you're asking, is more to
You're right on track. Yeah.
Okay, to that piece again. So again, throughout we're involved in that process. We're looking at the data. We're trying to help tweak interventions, because certainly if a child's needs could be met in a regular education setting, that's great. But we know that there's children that can't, and they need a higher level of support. So we're continually kind of assessing and what needs to be put into place to meet the needs of that child. Now, certainly if it's to the point that we sit down as a team and decide, with the parents involved, of course, because they're a part of that team, that it needs to go through that special education referral, and the team comes to that decision that it needs to do some more formal assessment. Certainly we're involved in that as well as assessors. And I think one of the questions I know somebody, I believe, had asked us, what does that look like during COVID? And we are continuing with those during COVID, just to put some people's mind at ease, with precautions in place, with PPEs and with parents feeling comfortable with that. So again, we are involved throughout that process. It may be behind the scenes and collaboration and with the teacher about putting in interventions and continuing to look at that data and see specifically what the needs are and how they might best be addressed.
And I think I tell people all the time, I call myself homegrown because I was born here, I was raised here, I went through all the schools here. Other than going to college, I pretty much have well, I know the community. So one of the things that when I have opportunities like this, I think we need to continue to help people to understand that an evaluation is a process. It's really not just an event where a person who is a school psychologist is coming in with a test kit and giving a test. That's a part of the evaluation, but it's a process, and you're gathering data, you're collecting data. Testing may be involved in the traditional sense that parents and people out in the community think that it's a person who is a psychologist coming in with a test kit and giving tests. So that's just one small piece of that, and the evaluation is a process. In Pitt County Schools, we all do, teachers, staff, school psychologists, school counselors, we do a great job in making it a team effort. One of the first things that we encourage parents to do when they think their child is experiencing any kinds of problems, whether it be academic or behavioral, we want to encourage them, and we continue to do that all the time pretty much. Make contact with your child's teacher or teachers and say, I think this, or I think that, can we have a meeting? Can we have a discussion? So your first line of communication would be with your child's teacher or teachers. And what we find oftentimes, believe it or not, I tell people all the time, it's really not rocket science. What we find is when we have those conversations between parents and teachers and whoever else is involved. Right now, when we say having a meeting, it's probably a Zoom meeting, but that's okay too. But when people come together and say, oh, well, I didn't know this, or oh, and when you come up with a plan and when you try to address the issues that way, that is the most important part of data collection for kids. So an evaluation is a process. It's really not an event. And that process works better if you begin with a conversation between a parent and the teachers.
Thank you so much. And you really started already answering some other questions that folks really had. Some folks were asking a little bit about that process. So if I, as a parent, think my child needs to be evaluated, who do I contact first? The teacher, the social worker, the principal? And it sounds like the teacher is a really good place to start. Can you all walk us through maybe what happens next? And if any of those formal evaluations need to happen, is there a timeline by which they have to happen? So I
Right.
contact the teacher, and then what happens next? And what's that timeline look like?
So like as Patricia was saying, you know, our hope certainly is you talk with the teacher and you might come up with a plan to address those behaviors. But let's say still there continues to be that concern where the child's not responding to what we're doing as an intervention. Then the IEP team would get together, and that is the parent certainly is invited to that meeting, as well as the school psychologist, typically a special education teacher, a regular education teacher, and an LEA rep, which is typically an administrator in the building. And then we would complete the special education referral. If the team again decides that yes, we need to collect more data and we need to move toward looking to see if the child is eligible for special education services, then we would have the parent, you know, sign either yes or no to move forward with that evaluation. From the time of that beginning of referral process where you've decided it needed to go a step further until eligibility is a 90-day timeline to have that from that referral part to then. So
That was exactly, I think, what we were looking
okay.
for.
All right.
Okay.
And you did, there's a couple of things I wanted to clarify. So one thing you mentioned just now is how many people can be involved in this process: the teacher, the school psychologist, the social workers, the parents. And is there ever a time that the student might be able to sit on these meetings and weigh in on their needs?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And to be honest, you know, and Patricia has had a lot of middle school and high school experience. I have a middle school now. Certainly, you know, at some ages, we definitely encourage that, you know, legally about in terms of being invited to their IEP meetings. If this is a child in special ed, they're going to be invited to those meetings at 14 anyway. However, you get a lot of good information from children when they sit in meetings, be it, you know, I had one recently where the student sat in the referral meeting. But certainly that's a very good point. The people that are going to be involved, or you want those people who are going to give you that information or that can be helpful into trying to make decisions for the student. So you're exactly right. In some situations, that is going to be school social workers got a wealth of information. They're going to be involved in that, or the nurse or the counselor. And in some cases, very well, you know, students are involved in those meetings.
And I think, yeah, and I have throughout my career, I've had lots of my assignments have been in middle schools and high schools. Oftentimes when the students are able to be involved in these meetings, whatever their meetings, if it's a referral meeting or just a problem solving meeting or just a meeting, when students have been able to be involved, the best thing that comes out of that is student accountability. Oftentimes what we will find is once that accountability is established and everybody who's involved, including the student, knows what's going to happen, knows what the expectations are, and the student is accountable, then that is very helpful in academic and behavioral support. That age range that you hear lots of information about, I would say from 11 to 14, those folks are really good information, because if they're involved in these things, they start to realize like, oh, these group of people, my parents, my teachers, my principal, the counselor, they're all involved in this and they're trying to help me. And they take ownership, they take accountability. So we do encourage that lots of times. sometimes we say, we get to the meeting, and Terry knows this, and all the people are in there, and the kid is in the 10th grade, he's 15 years old, and you're saying, well, where's he?
Where's he? Yeah.
So
Right.
you kind of say, well, can we go and get him? So it's we certainly encourage that. We certainly
Right, and kind of springboarding on that, that if it is a student that does end up being identified as a child with a disability, one, walking through that process of helping them understand, but also you want that child to start developing self-advocacy skills.
Right.
You want them to be in their IEP meeting. We've had meetings before where the parent or somebody said, well, I really think he needs this, or I need that. And the student, you get his perspective and goes, that doesn't help me at all. But this is what does help me.
Right.
So it does. You do want to start developing, and I know that kind of got off track a little bit, but some self-advocacy as well.
Absolutely. Parents are always surprised in our parent engagement program when we talk about the student being invited to those meetings. And I always want to send the message to parents that it is exactly what Ms. Cannon said. It's so important for our students to receive that message, that not only do they have a team of adults who are here to advocate for them, but they're part of that process, and they are part of the decisions being made about them. I actually had my 8-year-old sit in on her 504 meeting this year by accident, and I was amazed at how helpful it was.
The insight she had
to have her.
That's awesome.
So you all have mentioned the word IEP a lot, and I just mentioned 504. And a lot of parents wonder, what is the difference between the two, and are school psychologists involved with both?
Patricia, I can start and then you chime in.
All right.
Again, 504 is an accommodation plan versus an IEP where the child has been determined to need specially designed instruction. And so accommodations in the general education classroom versus needing a higher level of support through specially designed instruction.
Give us an example of maybe an accommodation and a special instruction piece.
Okay, so perhaps, and this is just really basic, so perhaps like a child with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder just needs accommodation of a classroom of just he needs to be preferentially seated, or a teacher needs to do frequent check-ins, like I'm going to check in after 10 minutes when he's working on independent work to make sure that he's on task, or we have a secret signal to get him back on task or something like that. Versus say you have a child who also has ADHD, but to the point that it has been so impactful in their educational because they have not been, for example, not totally tuned into instruction, or when there's independent work, they can't focus to the extent that they're starting to get some really big gaps that accommodations in and of themselves can address. So now we've moved to where they need, more support than just having accommodations.
And one of the other major differences is, as Terry said, there's no instruction paired with a 504. In those two examples, she said, if the student who has attention deficit is subsequently identified as a student with a disability, then a special education teacher will provide specially designed instruction in some of those areas that Terry talked about. And it might look like this. I'm gonna try to think of a goal, okay? So let's say it has been determined that the child has difficulty initiating tasks in the classroom. The teacher has done her instruction and she says, okay, boys and girls, now it's time for the you do part, okay? And let's say it has been identified that the child has difficulty initiating independent tasks. So what the special educator may do in the form of specially designed instruction, she will actually have a goal that is developed for the child that helps him or her with initiating tasks. And her job his job as a special educator is to actually work on that goal, to work with the child in specially designed instruction about how to initiate tasks, how to get started, And there may be steps like take out your paper, and they'll monitor that, or make sure you have your pencil sharpened, and how do I start tasks. So a special educator will be actually doing those things and working on that goal. If the child just has a 504 accommodation plan, it's just accommodations like preferential seating or something. So those are the major differences.
Perfect. That's a question we get a lot, and that was a really helpful explanation.
And in answer to your question to whether the school psychologist is involved or not, maybe, maybe not. And I think my colleagues would say the same. There are some 504s that I have been asked to be a part of, either because I have knowledge of the child and, related disabilities related to 504, and they want also some input related to what might be some appropriate accommodations. So we might be, we may not be, but are willing to be.
So a follow-up question, and this was not on the list that I sent you all, and parents, you all know that I collect in the days before and give them some time to prepare. But I am hearing a lot of parents tell me that their children have a 504 in place for face-to-face learning, that's been established even before COVID, with things like the check-in, teacher doing a frequent check-in or preferential seating. Are you all finding that there are ways to make, to add to that list of accommodations for when the child is at home learning virtually? And are we finding during COVID that we've got to be a little bit creative in adding to the list of, maybe the teacher isn't walking up to your desk and checking in, but on Zoom, they're saying, hey, Sally, just wanted to make sure you understood, or, what's the difference during COVID in terms of having accommodations for students?
It's the first thing that came to mind when you said that is because I do know, and I'm aware of a case, and that's exactly what they're doing, is just checking in with the student, especially when they were seeing some of those, because we're having that in general with some things are virtual weeks, assignments are not getting done at the same rate, and we all understand that and are working toward that being done at a higher rate, but they are doing some of those check-ins like you said. So I don't know necessarily that they're changing the 504 plan, but they're just how they're implementing it looks a little bit different since it's virtual.
Yeah.
That's been my experience. I don't know, Patricia, what you're aware of.
Yeah, it's very similar, and it may be with virtual learning that, like Terry said, the accommodation itself probably isn't changing, but how it's being done probably has to be changed. And maybe parent and teacher have to think outside of the box as to how you're going to do it. Because some kids will say, well, while we're on the virtual thing, I don't want to get embarrassed if she's asking me if I'm keeping up. So it may be that there may need to be a 5-minute thing before or after to do that. And that's just an example. I'm not,
yeah, absolutely.
Or it may be, and again, school psychologists, if are certainly willing to assist. It may be that it might need to be some parent training about how to, right before they log on, they can say, are you ready? Do you have your pencil? Do you have your materials? And then at the end, the teacher can follow up. So it may have to be a conversation between parent and teacher as to how we're going to do the accommodation while we're in the COVID. But it doesn't necessarily need to change. It just, the format might need to change. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Parents, I know that you hear me almost every one of these question and answer sessions talk about the importance of building relationships with your child's teachers. And what these ladies are saying is so true. If your child has certain accommodations that they normally get in the classroom, reach out to the teacher and say, hey, I know you can't walk up to her desk when she's learning virtually. So what can we do instead? That's the equivalent of that when she's at home. And those conversations can just be so productive when we as parents become teams with our teachers. So thank you. So I think you all have answered all of the questions except the last one, which I'm hoping, I think what you just said begins to lead into this. Are there strategies that parents could be practicing at home to help with some of the social emotional issues, especially when our children are virtually learning? What advice do you have for us at home?
All right. And I think we had talked about this a little bit before we got on because, some of the things that I'm seeing, and I think you can kind of look at this question a couple of different ways, is that because what I alluded to earlier about children sometimes not staying on top of some of their assignments, and then they're getting further and further behind, and then that raises their anxiety, and then that
Yes.
raises where I don't even know where to start, so I'm just not going to start. Kind
Right.
of, and I understand that. So then that's where some of that comes from. I think we're seeing both. We're seeing that piece, and then we're also seeing kids really struggle with not being with peers and, some other things like that. So, with the first thing, and I know Patricia started talking to that, I think it's real important. And again, talking about those partnerships is working with your child about, okay, I know you're not in the school building, but what can I do to help you get organized? How can I help you look at what assignments you have to do? Do we need to do a checklist? Is that helpful? So you start gaining some sense of control of, that piece of your environment, because we want to, lower that anxiety level. So I think part of that is, can kind of be taken care of with some of that piece that we're seeing. I also know that there are some things, and I'll let Patricia speak as well, but I also know that our schools, I think, are doing a nice job, at least the buildings I'm in, that those, you mentioned school counselors are reaching out to those and setting up, if they need to set up a little session, with the child. Because if they're feeling with some of those social kind of things that they're dealing with. So I think that, from the first part of it, again, is just what I'm seeing more now is that academic kind of loss of control is kind of spiraling into some other things. And I'm not quite sure that's what your parents were asking, but I'm seeing that as one component. And I don't know what you want to add, Patricia.
Yeah, and I think what we want, what we as school psychologists, but certainly we as school teams, what we want parents to know and understand is that the expectation is not that they experience this burden alone. I try to instill in my staff all the time, and Terry knows that I'm a real advocate for teams and children and communities and parents. I try to instill in my staff to every opportunity that you have to say to somebody's mom, somebody's dad, or somebody's grandmama, to just say, it is okay. We know that you have to go to work. We know that you have to figure out what we're eating for supper, which, that can put you in trauma right there. We know that you have to figure out the next day. We know that right now, all of these things are happening, and the expectation, we don't want parents or children or teachers or anybody to feel like they're out there doing it by themselves, because when it comes to academics, that can be very anxiety provoking. And we do want people to feel like that they can reach out, and they can, and it's okay. Everybody needs to understand that this isn't a normal time. So things aren't really gonna be normal. I've heard parents say, well, he had a 98 average in biology, and it's gone
Right,
down
that's a
to
lot.
and it's gone down to 78 or worse.
Right.
And we know that that's bad, and we know that we want our children to succeed. But what we have to think about when we think about the 98 and the 78 is what's happening right now. So we have to really, and it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing for everybody, teachers and parents, because sometimes the teachers are going, he had a 98, now he has a 78. So we have to say to ourselves as teams and as working together with students, well, given everything that's happening, is the 78 really that bad? No.
And kind of piggybacking on that again with your children, to let them know, we're struggling as
Right.
adults. And we would like to think we have more coping skills than they are where they are. And I think it's very important to be very honest with children. Yeah, I get it. This is tough. this is not normal. What you're feeling is totally okay, you know,
Right.
and how can I help support you? And again, you know, either, you know, reaching out to those resources in the school, you know, certainly we're there and um, want to help in any way we can because we certainly are all in this together.
Mhm.
Some things that I really heard parents as we think about some concrete tasks that we can do. Some concrete things I've heard from these ladies are things like helping our children make checklists.
Mhm.
I know that our family is really struggling with the week on, week off, and what do I need to have together by 8:30 in the morning to leave the house? So
Right.
we have really detailed checklists next to the
Right.
door. We have checklists out on virtual week. What do they do? How does their day go? What do they need to check off by the end of the day? I heard you all talk a lot about reaching out to your resources. So reach out to your teacher, reach out to your school counselor. It might be the first time you've ever thought about reaching out
Right.
to a school counselor, and
Right.
yet they're there. That's what they're there for. So reach out. That teamwork piece. Make sure that even as frustrated as we might get in times with all of these changes and all of the different pieces that we're putting together, it's really important that we create teamwork instead of adversarial work. So show
Right.
your child how to create teamwork during these frustrating times with their teachers, their counselors, their administration. And then I think the most important thing we heard you ladies say was validate. Let
Mhm.
your students know that they are okay.
Okay.
You know, there are probably some days that maybe I've gotten a 78 at work lately because we're in the middle of COVID. And there are days that are more difficult than others.
Mm.
And as adults, we don't get grades on a daily basis, but
Right.
I bet if we did, we'd see some fluctuation
Mhm.
recently
Yeah.
among ourselves.
Mhm.
So validate to your child that it's okay, that next grade can be better. Come up with some strategies for the next grade and move on.
And move on. Right. Move
Really
on.
help them
Mhm.
really embrace just grace. Great. And I've said that in so many of
Mhm.
these question and answer videos. I have said, give yourselves grace, give your teachers grace,
Get it right.
help your students give themselves grace and figure out how to be resilient and recover from a hard experience and move on to the next one with some skills to make that next one better. Ladies, you all have been so helpful today. And again, happy School Psychologist Week. We probably
Thank
should have a
you.
whole year for you because I know you all work so very hard to help our students and our families. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for joining us today. Parents, thank you for watching. And please always feel okay reaching out to your teacher, your counselor, your school psychologist. They're all there for you. And they are happy to connect.